Have you ever checked for the exits when walking into a room? My father is saying goodbye to me at the gate, but before the white stewardess walks me onto the plane, he kneels down, looks me in the eye, and says, "Remember, Laura, this is important. If you're ever in trouble, always look for a sister." I am 7 going on 8 and bouncing around as I'm about to fly by myself for the second time in my life after visiting him for summer vacation. The year is 1972. So this is pre-cell phones, pre-car phones, pre-answering machines. So picture that, my Black parents, my artist mother, my doctor father, both of whom were raised in Chicago during Jim Crow segregation, turning over the care of their young Black daughter to these white airports and airlines, and then rushing home to wait by the phone, the landline, until one of them calls the other from the airport payphone and says, "She's here, she's safe." When my father was telling me to look for a sister, he was saying to look for a Black woman, meaning that a Black woman, any Black woman, a complete stranger to me, would probably offer me more safety than the white people into whose authority I'd been entrusted. 50 years later, it's still the first thing I do. I walk into a room and I look for the sisters and the brothers and the others. I count to see how many folks of the non-dominant culture there are. And if there are none, I check for the exits. In September of 2018, I went to a 3-day writer's retreat called Brave Magic up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I'd flown up there from Los Angeles, where I live, rented a car, and then driven up to the facility. Windy mountain roads, lush, beautiful forests. When I arrived there, I did my normal thing, looking for a sister. I looked for some all afternoon, and by the next morning, I came to the startling realization that out of the 600 people there, I was the only Black one. So I immediately began to have this very dual experience. As a writer, I was in heaven. I was in a room full of creatives for 3 whole days. I brought 2 blank notebooks with me and filled them both up with all the writing assignments they gave us. But as a Black woman, I had an incredibly solo experience because I was entirely without affinity. Later on that second day, I was in one of those awkward moments, like between sessions, when everybody kind of clicks off and goes to the coffee station, and I didn't have anybody to talk to. I couldn't even pretend to look at my phone because there was no Wi-Fi. So I kind of made my way over to this group of moms who seemed good with including me in their conversation. And one of them starts talking, bragging about her son, who was pulled over for a traffic stop. And he argued his way out of the ticket. He was pre-law, apparently. So he used the law to put that policeman in his place. Well, the other women in the group were all nodding and smiling and laughing. But I was so angry and so hurt. I couldn't back away fast enough because I didn't want them to see hot tears filling my eyes. The feeling that I got in this group of women, the joy, the pride, the optimism for this boy's future, possibly as an attorney, were in direct conflict with the anguish and sense of futile injustice that I was experiencing. I have trained my 2 Black sons for hours about what to do when they are pulled over by the police, not if, but when they are pulled over by the police. Black people call it the talk. Keep your hands on the wheel. Narrate in a clear, steady voice every single movement for the officer. "I'm turning off the car now, officer. I'm reaching for my wallet, sir or ma'am." And most importantly, never, ever talk back to a police officer. This is a matter of life and death. So I didn't say any of this out loud, but it must have showed on my face because these women looked over at me, lowered their voices, and then changed the subject, leaving me with no one to nod to, no one to look across the room at, no one who could validate my experience. Later, I was paired with this very sweet redheaded woman for a writing exercise, where we're supposed to share a piece of writing with each other. But instead, she put her notebook aside and started talking and crying about the plight of African Americans in our country. She offered me unneeded and unwanted sympathy for my quote-unquote condition, being Black, without prompting or invitation. In the allotted 5-minute time period we had to share our work with each other, she said the words African American to me no less than 9 times. Yes, I counted. So in her effort to connect, she actually did the opposite and left me feeling more alone. So I got home from Brave Magic and I was so confused and shocked by what had happened that I had to document my experience. So I wrote an article about it and it went viral. Within hours, I had 568 direct messages from people of all races from all over the world. The vast majority of them, 500 or so, writing to tell me, hey, I get it. I know what it's like to feel alone in a room full of people. But they were about 60 or so from people who definitely did not get it. People who were writing to tell me why my experience was invalid. Here's one from a white woman that we'll call Ashley. I think your feelings and perspective were driven by your own insecurity about race. It had nothing to do with the organizers or the energy of the retreat. You were out of your comfort zone. So what? That does not mean the event was racist or intentionally excluding Black people. So I've never responded to any of these messages, but if I were going to, I might say something like this. Humor me by picturing yourself arriving at a 3-day, 600-person event in a remote location, something you've been excited about for months, and then finding when you get there that everyone there, and I mean everyone down to the folks that work there, are Black. And then picture yourself, in the hallway, the way that I described, screwing up your courage to inch your way over toward this small huddle of Black women. Imagine what it might feel like when you joined and they were talking about the horror of a young Black man getting pulled over by the police, and that when your reaction is sensed, they lower their voices and change the subject on your account. And then I'd like you to picture sitting across from the woman during that writing exercise that I described. But instead of reading you what she's written, she sets her notebook aside in favor of discussing your whiteness. Not in a hostile way, but in an uninvited way. And mentioning your whiteness no less than 9 times with tears in her eyes, because she feels so sorry for the white people of this country. And then I'd say to her, perhaps you would wish as I did that there was someone else who looked like you in that moment, anyone else who could have validated your experience. And then maybe you see why the sympathy that my writing partner offered me, though well-intentioned, only served to make me feel like more of an outsider. In November of 2018, this is 1 month after my article went viral, 2 months after Brave Magic, Ellen Pompeo, Gabrielle Union, Emma Roberts, and Gina Rodriguez all arrived on set for a Net-a-Porter Actress Roundtable. It is written that Gabrielle Union was the only Black person on set that day, including the crew. Even still, this is an event I probably would never have heard about if it weren't for the fact that Ellen Pompeo did something extraordinary that day. She used her privilege to address something that could have easily gone unchecked. This day has been incredible, but I didn't see enough color when I walked in. As Caucasian people, it is our responsibility to make sure we speak up in every single room we walk into and say, this is not okay, and that we can all do better. It's our job. We created the problem. When I heard about this, what she'd done, I was so filled up with gratitude and relief. I mean, here was Ellen Pompeo, a white woman with one of the highest privilege rankings in the world, calling out the thing that I had lived with for my entire life. Ellen was asking everyone to look for a sister. She was saying that if you're at the table and you have a voice, you have an obligation to use your voice on behalf of those who weren't invited to the table or whose voices don't get heard. Speak truth to power. Speak up for the marginalized person's voice who is missing from the conversation. So back to Ashley. I would also say to her that if she read my article, she would see that I never said that Brave Magic was intentionally excluding Black people. My point was that it wasn't intentionally including anyone other than folks of the dominant culture. I think when people hear the word inclusion, they think, oh, that's really nice, but that's probably someone else's job. Or maybe you want to do something, but the idea of marching and protesting or becoming an anti-racist educator are just too daunting. But what I'm proposing is something that I think everyone can participate in. Let's call it intentional inclusion. Because I know you want solutions too, but maybe you just don't know what you can do. So what can you do? Well, you can start by looking around at every space you walk into through my eyes. In other words, like Ellen, you start checking for the sisters. And by sisters here, I'm using it as code for any marginalized person. If you're in a room and you're in the majority, first of all, notice that. Take that in. And then ask yourself, where are the others? If there's not enough color in the room that you're in, walk up to the powers that be and say something like this. I'm coming to you because I don't see enough diversity here, and I'd like to discuss what we can do about it. Maybe you won't get the response you want, or maybe you won't get any response at all, but you're doing something. You're starting a process, you're planting a seed, you're leading by example. And if we all do this, we'd be setting the table for intentional inclusion everywhere we go. And then maybe, possibly one day, no one would have to feel like the only one in the room.